I used to be like a worrier. Like I would stress myself out crazy with all the unknowns, right? That I wanted to know, right? And I think I eventually learned like that there's no way I was going to be successful being paralyzed by fear. Like you really have to figure things out and as you go, be willing to take a step in any direction, and things will correct themselves along the way. That's typically how it works, right? We don't have all the answers. We can figure it out as we go, but we can't be paralyzed by fear.
Our voices, stories, and experiences are powerful and need to be shared to create a more inclusive world. Welcome to Hablemos, conversations with talented humans about inclusion, leadership, and purpose. I'm your host, Carolina Veira, finance and business strategist, DEI champion, and proud Latina. I'm also the director of partnerships at CareMax, where I lead initiatives to promote the value of healthcare, education, inclusion, entrepreneurship, and community engagement, while fostering partnerships with other corporations and organizations in the U.S. This episode features Claudia Torres Yañez, Senior Director, Total Rewards at SunPower. Claudia has over 13 years of experience in executive and equity compensation in private and public technology companies. Prior to joining SunPower, Claudia served in numerous finance and accounting roles at Motorola and Freescale Semiconductor. When she's not working to help change the way our world is powered, she volunteers to help register more voters in Texas, working up a sweat at the gym, or reading a book. Hi, Claudia. How are you today?
Hola, Carolina. I am wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm very happy to be joining you again today after our conversation last week, and to continuing this conversation in this awesome platform you're providing.
Yeah, no, it's great to have you. I learned a little more about Claudia last week during a conference for SunPower. That's the company that she works for, and that she's very committed and very aligned, I would believe. You have a wonderful team there. It's a wonderful organization. We're very happy of all the work, especially in diversity, equity, and inclusion that Maribel is doing. She's leading that and having awesome contributors, directors, wonderful leadership team, you in it. I know that you guys are shining really, really bright, but why don't you go ahead and share a little bit about your story here with us? Who are you? Where were you born? And you have a beautiful story there. So share your story with us.
Sure. Thank you. And yes, definitely shout out to Maribel and to my leader, my HR leader, Doug Richards, who gave me this opportunity 8 years ago, which is how long I've been at SunPower. So my story, I'm born and raised on the Texas-Mexico border in South Texas, in a city called Del Rio, which I think has been in the news a lot lately if you watch the news, because of the Haitian migrant situation, unfortunately. But yes, I say I come from an immigrant family. For those of us that are born and raised in an area, on a border area like in South Texas, the story's always a little more complicated. I only learned years later as an adult that my great-grandmother was actually born in the Austin area, which is where I live and work now. So again, am I an immigrant or am I native to Texan? And right. only now, after learning some of the things I've learned about my family history and about Texas history, have I kind of moved away actually from Latina and from Hispanic to really owning that, that special place that is the border, that unique place that is the border. So if you find me on Twitter, which is one way you can find me, I recently changed it to say Tejana, because that's what I consider myself now, right? Which is a very, very unique blend of Mexico and, Texas in my past. But in any case, when I was a child, my parents I considered immigrants, and I grew up in an extended family like many of us do with my abuelitos, my grandparents. I'm the oldest of three kids, the first to go to college, not having many opportunities, and being, low income for all intents and purposes. I knew that the only way to have a better life was through education. So I pursued a degree in accounting at the University of Texas at Austin. I passed my CPA exam on my first try. I give all the credit to the university and my professors there.
And which I know is not easy. Let me clarify that, because it's one of the toughest exams out there. So kudos to you. It's still a huge accomplishment.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I began my professional career in the tech industry in Austin at Motorola, another very well known and recognized name. And I did about 15 years in what I would call like traditional accounting finance roles. Always sort of wondering if there was something else for me, professionally. I considered HR for a bit, but I didn't quite see the path there until, and I write about it in my contribution to the Hispanic Star Rising Volume 1 book that you just mentioned. An opportunity presented itself to me through my network, and it was in the area of executive compensation within the HR team. And I always like to tell people, like, I Googled that because I didn't know what that meant. Like, I knew what it meant, obviously.
Right.
And it goes without
But you
saying.
didn't know what it entailed.
Right. I didn't know what the day-to-day job actually was and why these folks thought of me as someone being potentially a good fit for that role. Right. So after agonizing a little bit about whether it was the right move to be making or not professionally, I thought about it and, talked to people about it and came to the conclusion that I had nothing to lose, right? That I would give it a try, that I may like it. Or if it didn't work out, I know there's always another monthly close and another quarterly close, and there's always a need for resources in finance. So I figured it was low risk to give it a try. And, it's been 14 years since I made that switch. I dated.
Are they still waiting for you in the finance area for
well,
the monthly
no, I don't think anyone's waiting for me, but, as luck would have it, and why probably I was considered a good fit for the role in the first place is I work very closely with colleagues in finance and accounting because, the executive compensation field is very heavy on the financials, on shareholder and special tax rules, things of that nature. So why it was such a good fit for me in the first place, having the financial acumen with my business and my accounting degree. And so I go back to that border analogy I mentioned, right, where I'm not quite immigrant, not quite native Texan, or I'm this blend of both. That kind of applies in my professional life as well, right? I'm not quite in the accounting area. I'm not completely HR because I have, these sort of special powers, if you will. And so I'm this sort of blend, right, of both. And yeah.
A beautiful blend. A beautiful
Thank you.
blend.
I'd like to think so too.
Of course, because I think you have to use, I don't know, both sides of the brain. I mean, the being that people person that, make sure that they understand the role and what they bring to the table, but also the analytical side and how they can all find that balance. I think it's great.
Absolutely. I love that I haven't completely moved away from my affinity to the numbers, like you and I talked about last week, and I think it's on my LinkedIn profile that one of my favorite phrases is like, numbers don't lie, right? Like, what do the numbers say, right? And using that to analyze, to, build strategies that support the mission of the company, right? But at the same time, like you said, there's that people aspect, right? That you want to use that knowledge and that tool set to benefit people, right? And specifically the employees of the organization and their families and the shareholders of the company, right? There's so many individuals that are impacted and stand to benefit by the programs that I help design, run, manage, et cetera.
do you feel that sense? I mean, one of the things that you mentioned is, why did they think of me for this role? And obviously they saw all that potential in you. But did it take you a little bit of time to understand what they saw in you, or was it a natural aha moment where, oh yeah, it makes sense because, this is who I am. This is what they need. Obviously, that's why they're asking me to join that team. Or was it more of a, oh my goodness, I didn't know that I brought this to the table?
It was more the latter. Like it took me a while to sort of connect the dots and buy into the idea that, this made sense for me.
Mm-hmm.
The person that called me up about this opportunity was another woman. So, I think, knowing Claudia, knowing my personality, knowing, like you said, my affinity for people, I have to believe she recognized that in me as well. Second, I think some of the work that I had done with her specifically in our accounting department had been like researching accounting standards that applied. In that particular department, it was Motorola, we were doing cost accounting. So we were valuing inventory, right? So we got into some technical questions about the valuation of inventory. And what goes on the balance sheet versus what are R&D expenses in the area of inventory, right? And so that had been a big project that she and I had worked on. When I Googled executive comp and I read that there's SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission rules, that there's special IRS tax rules, right? I started to understand like, oh, I might have to research and understand some pretty technical rules that I quickly saw the link to my accounting GAAP, IFRS, right? Technical rules. So it took me a while just because I hadn't been exposed to executive comp or that world. But the minute I did just some quick, literally Google research, it was like, oh, okay, I have transferable skills. I should be open to
And
that.
what I want to rescue from everything that you've shared is the power not only of your network, the people that you've
Absolutely.
worked with prior to the role that you're in right now, but also the people that you make connections with, and also how they become your sponsors. And that's one thing that I always try to bring or make mention of, how we need more of those, not only mentors, but sponsors, people who are going to talk about you for and recommend you for a project, or even in this case, right? That person work with you, knows your value, understands who you are and the quality of work, and you as a person. And they're willing to make that call and say, hey, I think you'll be great at this, and helping you realize that you're more than just one thing. You can bring so much value in so many areas. So that's fantastic.
Yeah, no, that is spot on. Yeah, I mean, this is a field, again, the field I've been in the last 14 years that never, like, it's not something you hear about like in high school, right? Like, I want to grow up and be an executive comp leader, right? Like, I wanted to be an astronaut at one point. Maybe I can still go to space nowadays, right? But yeah, it was definitely helpful for my network to help me find opportunities I would not have otherwise targeted.
And then in this sense, now you're in a different team, but you're still leading, you're still working with people, you're still helping people understand, obviously who they are, what they do. Compensation is major for anyone in any field. How would you define your leadership style, and what do you think now in this role? What do you think it's your purpose?
Oh, that's a great question. And I mean, obviously I got a little bit of an advanced preview of the questions and like your purpose and your why. I was like, oh my goodness, that's like, I don't typically stop to think about that. Right. But, if I step back and I think about what I've been doing and who I've been doing it for the last 14 years, SunPower is a clean energy, green energy company, right? And that's, I believe, the future right? And so I feel really good about like using the skills and the talent I have, which, you know, it's not, I'm not an engineer, I'm not designing the solar panels, right? I'm not on the technical side of it, but I am on the business side. I am on what I call not the human resources, but the human capital, right? I think there's an increased recognition that, you know, it's not just the financial capital that a company is using to bring about, you know, change in the world, in this case, changing the way our world is powered with green energy, but, you know, bringing the talent of its employees to bear in making all of those things possible, right? And so that's what's exciting and energizing to me, that I get to work in that space, in the human capital space, in putting together programs that make a difference in the lives of the employees, right? That are making all of this change happen. And, you know, what better space than in green energy? I'll plug the data sheet. So the Hispanic Star has the Hispanic Heritage Month Toolkit, which I've been using, and I encourage everybody to go and check it out. But there's one specifically on green energy, right? And the facts are alarming, right? 50% of Latinos in the US live in the most polluted cities in the country. Like, that's bad. And you know, being in a company like SunPower that's trying to do something about that, about, you know, pollution, about having cleaner sources of energy, like, we can make a real difference in our community and in the broader, you know, country, right? Not just Latinos, obviously. The other thing that it excites me, and it's another fact on that that fact sheet, and that's the projection that there will be 24 million new jobs in the green energy industry created over the next 10 years. And so I'm, you know, at the center of that, right? Being in HR, you know, working on compensation and benefits programs that attract, retain, and motivate that workforce of the future. And getting to put together programs like, for example, our company stock program that helps share in that wealth creation, right, in our community and amongst our employees. So, you know, my why, like, I can link it back to those things, and I get a lot of satisfaction thinking I'm helping be that, you know, middle woman between the company and its employees.
Hi everybody, hola a todos, this is Carolina. I personally would like to invite you to be part of Hablemos by heading over to carolinaveda.com/Hablemos to sign up today. And while you're there, take a look at my DEI initiatives and discover how we can all be agents of change by creating sustainable projects through a DEI lens, and by sharing and celebrating our authentic stories and experiences while leading with compassion and empathy. No, and amazing. And thank you for bringing all of those numbers, facts, in making sure that we are aware. You're saying 24 million jobs in the field of energy, and we want more Hispanics to take that piece of that of those 24 millions and advance and grow, and we want more underserved communities, minorities, as some of us call us, to be part of that growth as well, and in that progression, right? I mean, like you said, allowing or companies coming up with ideas to be more sustainable, more energy efficient. That's the only way that our planet is going to survive. It's going to really, we're going to have the generations and the new people, the new kids getting out of college and having jobs and having lives that are worth living, right? I mean, it's the conditions that we're seeing day after day are pretty scary, to put it that way. And if there's something that we can do as an organization or as an employee to affect change, why not, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, I also think back to the part of Texas that I'm from, right? Being from South Texas, oil and gas, right, is a big industry still in our state. And, it's not uncommon to a lot of people where I grew up, their fathers, their brothers work in the oil fields, right?
That's all they know.
That's all they know. And it would be fantastic for the new opportunities, like the 24 million jobs, right? For more of that opportunity to be visible and available, right? To people from like the part of the state that I'm from. I think there's still a reluctance to let go of oil and gas because of its economic power in our state. But I'm hopeful that will improve, as I think it will over time.
I'm sure that with leaders like yourself and others and at SunPower, we'll see change. But like you said, it's going to be a slow process. But I do think that that it will happen. It's going to take us a little bit of time to get there, but we'll get there.
Absolutely.
And then, I mean, you have a beautiful story with living in or growing up in Del Rio in Texas. And you mentioned also in your bio that you were raised by your grandparents and your parents. And you also have mentioned that you have two brothers and sisters. I don't know if one brother, one sister, but
one of each.
One of each. Okay, perfect. So tell us a little bit about that, about growing up there. Is there something that really changed you or touched you growing up in that area? I can only imagine all the stories, but is there a life story out there that it's worth mentioning in Del Rio?
I think I thought about that too. And I was like, okay, one event, it's kind of hard to like name one thing. I think it's more that phenomenon of growing up in the extended family environment, and really that driven by economics, right? Like my parents were very young. My mother had me at 16. So you pretty much had to be in the extended family for the whole family to thrive, right? We couldn't really do it on our own. So I think it was that seeing others, step up and being willing to be a support system made a big difference to me. Seeing how hard my family worked, right? In very, labor minimum wage type of work. I think that had a big influence on me early on, that, I had to study.
Yeah. And do you think that made you want to achieve more because you saw the need? You saw the struggle, or?
Yeah. And probably being bored, right? Because when you don't have resources, it's like I wasn't enrolled in ballet classes, right? Or piano classes. Like I didn't have any of these things. So for me, it was like, okay, I had an appetite for learning and doing things, but not really the resources to be exposed to those things, right? So for me, it was, how do I satisfy my natural curiosity and boredom, right? And that usually meant reading, books, things like that, which just, I think, gave me an appetite for more, right? I'm also the firstborn, so I'm the oldest of the grandchildren and within my family. And I think there is a little bit, not just too much psychoanalysis, but I do feel like I had the need for approval and, to achieve, to please my parents. So I know there's definitely an aspect of that, had something to do with me trying to overachieve as much as I could, every chance I could.
And you also became a role model for your brother and your sister. I mean, that's a pretty big, not only accomplishment, it's more of a weight at some point, right, on your shoulders. Yeah. Hey, I gotta do right because these kids are looking up to me. But do you have a role model that you looked up to and you said, oh, this is why I want to do it, because I can see myself in that person?
Oh, I really didn't, like, not in the professional sense, like, oh, I knew a CPA or I knew it wasn't really that. I did have, and I still do have a very deep admiration for like my father and my grandparents. If I focus on my father, like, he dropped out of high school. He started school in the US in like sixth grade, right? So he'd already kind of missed a lot of time. Dropped out, got his GED, took advantage of a free like a trade school training program to become an electrician. And today he's a very successful electrician. I call him an entrepreneur because he's always got like so many projects, aside from the electrical work he does, which he's done a lot of work for like car dealerships in Texas. Like, he gets sent all over the state to install, the electrical work on car dealerships. That's a big part of the job work that he does. But in addition to that, he's got plants that he helps service on the other side of the border, which was the job he did for many years, like providing equipment maintenance to maquiladoras, right? The factories on the other side of the border. Plus, at some point, like I think it's almost been 10 years now, I could be wrong, but he decided that he wanted to open a motorcycle shop. So add to all of that work, a motorcycle business that, has been thriving for several years now, well, probably a decade at this point. So, my father's like work ethic and his like improving himself despite where he came from and like sort of being behind, right, given when he started school, I would say that was very inspirational to me to like put in the work.
That's amazing. And I love that it's your dad. I mean, I think we do have a connection, a special connection. Daughters and fathers have a special connection, right? So it's great. Thank you for sharing that. And what about those grandparents? Don't leave them out.
Oh my
cute story there.
I was trying to avoid going there because those will make me cry because I've lost them both at this point.
I'm sorry.
On my father's side. But yeah, my grandfather was a ranch hand, a ranch worker. I have some like really beautiful black and white pictures of him on a horse in Abilene, Texas, in Crystal City, Texas. Not the cowboys I think you typically see in US Westerns, but
okay.
The guys that do the hard work on the ranches, right? And fixing the fences and breaking in the animals and what I can't speak to what all ranch hands do, but really tough outdoor work, right?
Yeah.
So he did that for as long as he could until that was no longer what he could do because he was out in rural areas where my dad and his brothers didn't have access to school, right? In these areas. So that's what got him to basically give up his work to sacrifice, right? What I'm sure he enjoyed doing, to move to Del Rio where, his boys could attend school, right? So that's my grandfather. My grandmother, so she was the youngest of her family. I don't know the exact number, call it 7 or 8 brothers and sisters, mainly sisters. Left her family in Musquis, Coahuila, that's a northern Mexico city, left there to basically follow my grandfather to his Texas, ranch working area. So which I thought was pretty, looking back now, I think, wow, like she was pretty brave, right? Like
right.
To leave her family, the baby of the family, which is probably right in terms of birth order. They're the more adventurous folks, right. I think. Left everything to follow my grandfather to Texas. For love. Isn't that beautiful? Like, yes. And she, instead of staying home, which I'm sure she did for part of the time, but, in order to survive, like she got a job it was basically a Levi's factory. So she became a seamstress working in the factory. I think she worked for 15 years before they shut the plant down and relocated it to Mexico, ironically. But, she worked that job for 15 years. I remember her getting up early hours, probably 5 a.m., right? And I remember her washing the dishes late at night after dinner, and I would sleep with her, right? Because we lived in the same household, right? And I remember very vividly sitting by the stove or sitting by refrigerator in the kitchen, falling asleep, waiting for her to finish washing the dishes when I wasn't helping her. You know, I got to a point where I would like pull up a step and help her wash. But anyhow, you know, I think back now and I think, wow, like she must have been exhausted, right? Like working at the factory at a sewing machine all day long, coming home, cooking dinner because she cooked dinner, right? Like it wasn't takeout. It wasn't, you know, frozen meals. It was like good, you know, arroz y frijoles and the whole tortillas, right? Like the traditional
freshly made. But you know what? It's beautiful that you share her story because it shows the love. It shows the sacrifice.
See, you're gonna make me cry.
No, and I feel it, and I feel the love and the admiration that you feel for your grandma, and it reminds me of my grandma. So we're in the same boat. We're very deeply connected to our roots and to our families and the women and the men in our lives and our families. But it's the story of, I believe, the story of many of us out there where we make sacrifices and we show our love through food or through, you know, through staying up late, doing dishes and making sure that everybody's fed and happy, regardless and despite the conditions or the environment. Do we just take care of each other? And that's something that we should celebrate. And it's worth mentioning, particularly this month, but we should celebrate those values and that heritage throughout the year, because it's so important to preserve that and to talk about our grandparents that sacrificed so much and that they did so much. And they really, when you mention work ethic and you talk about them, you can see it, right? And their commitment to the family. So thank you for sharing that story. It's very beautiful. I can picture your grandma, you know, just doing dishes and you're like falling asleep. It's the cute stuff.
Yeah, I guess that's an event I certainly remember. Yeah.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. And obviously, I want to invite everyone to read your story. It's on page, like we said, 262. And then you mentioned, feel the fear and do it anyway. Have you experienced that? You're just so afraid of doing something, but let me go for it. No. Yeah. And I love that in your story, you also mentioned that now you realize it's not about having all the answers. It's just taking action, right? Getting it done. And then it's kind of like, we'll figure it out at some point, right? But just making it happen.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I used to be like a worrier. Like I would stress myself out crazy with all the unknowns, right? That I wanted to know, right? And I think I eventually learned like that there's no way I was going to be successful being paralyzed by fear. Like you really have to figure things out and as you go, be willing to take a step in any direction, and you know things will correct themselves along the way. That's typically how it works, right? We don't have all the answers. We can figure it out as we go, but we can't be paralyzed by fear.
Absolutely. And especially with women, sometimes we look for everything to be perfect and everything to be, you know, everything to just be ready for us. And sometimes, well, most of the time it doesn't happen that way. We just have to go for it and make it happen. And I'm sure that's been your story. So thank you so much for sharing this and sharing the story of your family. I love that. I love thank you for your being vulnerable and just sharing, because that's what we need more of. If anyone wants to reach out to you, how do they go about that?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn. Look me up on LinkedIn. Claudia Torres Yañez is my, I think.
Without the ñ.
Without the ñ on LinkedIn, because I couldn't figure out how to put the ñ, just the N. I'm on Twitter, Claudia T. Yañez. I warn you, I have a lot of strong opinions about things. That's usually where it ends up, on Twitter. All the social media, Instagram, Facebook, I'm on all of them. So
yeah, and Instagram, I think yours as C. Yañez.
C. Yañez.
With a Z at the end. So it's really
I post on my trips. I like to travel, and so that's typically where those pictures end up.
Fantastic. No, thank you so much, Claudia. It's been a pleasure to have you. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for being so open and so kind and showing that tender and soft side of you, but also, you know, you're everything that you are. You do strike me as that person who's a go-getter and no fear, even though there's always a little bit of fear, but we just have to go for it. And thank you for being a role model to many of us out there, and for all the wonderful work that you're doing with SunPower. I have to mention that again. You guys are fantastic, and I love what you're doing. I love the transition personally from finance to HR. I think it's the perfect transition.
Funny story. I think I shared it last week. Someone actually told me from finance at the time I made that decision that it was like the worst decision I could make. So I don't know what was behind that. I don't share that sentiment. But thank you for this forum. Thank you for giving me space. Thank you for letting me relive some of these memories with my abuelitos, who I miss dearly. But I think you saw like they hold a very special and fundamental place in who I am. So thank you.
No, thank you. I know I share the sentiment. They are the reason why we're here, and that's who we're celebrating. We're celebrating them and their sacrifices and their love. So
Absolutely.
Thank you, Claudia. It's been a pleasure, and I hope to have you here again at some point when you feel like coming and sharing maybe your next book. I don't know if you decide ever to write again or do something. Hey, you have a platform here, so this is your home, my dear.
Gracias. I appreciate it. Thank you so much, Carolina.
Thank you so much for everyone tuning in today. Thank you for sharing our stories and for celebrating with us, celebrating the stories of resilience, our heritage, everything that makes us who we are. So have a good one, everybody, and see you next week. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to our podcast today, and also send me a DM at Caro Veira. Share the love, share the comments, share the thoughts. Special thanks to our partners at the Hispanic Star and Catuna Digital Marketing. Gracias mil. Thank you for listening, everybody, and we'll be back next time with a new episode of Hablemos. Ciao.